Each year, Canada quietly ships $3.9 billion worth of nickel metal straight to Detroit, fueling America's electric vehicle ambitions. But then came August, and with it, a bombshell. The U.S. president, once a casino mogul and stake seller, signed a single document and declared himself the master of supply chains. Trump slapped a 20% tariff on electric vehicles, aiming at China, but the damage didn't stop there. It hit Canada, too, America's oldest trading partner, closest neighbor, and hockey-watching buddy. No backroom negotiations. No special consideration. Just a blunt economic wall that defied logic. In response, Ottawa didn't tweet in outrage. They began quietly readying trade countermeasures. When you sever a critical supply route for North America's battery production, don't act surprised if Canada doesn't respond with just words, but with action. It's time we picked up where we left off, before the wall builder-in-chief decided protecting American jobs meant taxing the very metals powering American vehicles. For years, the nickel flow from Sudbury, Ontario to Detroit has quietly kept U.S. battery factories running. The source wasn't China or Russia. It was right next door in Ontario. Every year, 185,000 tons of nickel and copper traveled this corridor, generating over $3.9 billion in battery material. This wasn't a problem. It was a backbone. But try explaining that to someone treating economic policy like monopoly, and it only gets more absurd. Every 86-kilowatt battery in a typical SUV using NMC 811 chemistry contains roughly 38 kilograms of nickel, making up 80% of the cell. At current market rates, $1.20 for 100 per ton, that's about $775 in nickel per battery. Add in Trump's new 30% tariff, and the cost jumps by $230 just to cross the border. That extra burden brings the total nickel cost to somewhere between $950 and $1,200 per battery, cutting GM's expected profit margin from 10.1% down to 8.3%. Let's be clear. Big U.S. companies hate single-digit profits, unless it's about their taxes. Worse still, this smart policy alone will kill off 94,000 EV sales in 2026, according to Arena's July modeling. So let's do the math. A policy claimed to be pro-American is actually raising costs, slashing profits, reducing sales, and forcing GM to both hike prices and lay off engineers. It's like jamming a brick onto the accelerator and blaming the brakes for failing. The system worked until someone with a grudge against wind turbines decided to smash it with a wrecking ball. And while Detroit's battery plan suffered, Canada didn't just sit idle. They acted. Before July was over, Ottawa skipped the press conferences and rolled out a detailed four-part response. Precise, focused, and pressure-oriented. First, a 15% export tax on raw nickel, aimed squarely at U.S. battery makers who long enjoyed duty-free Sudbury metal. So much for special friendship. Second, a new carbon monitoring system for battery materials. Only nickel refined using Ontario's hydroelectric power gets to use the naphtha fast lane. Dirtier processes? Take the scenic route, or find another buyer. If the U.S. insists on America first, Canada feels just fine offering better prices and cleaner metals elsewhere. Third, Canada launched a $257 million investment fund across Quebec and Ontario to accelerate local LFP battery development, using less nickel per cell and lowering dependency on countries confusing taxes with strategy. Finally, Ottawa announced generous tax incentives to lock in Stellantis LG's 20-gigawatt battery plant in Windsor. Jobs? Canada wants them too, and they're not just talking. They're competing. According to the Canadian Spending Office's July 28 report, these combined actions could redirect over $1.8 billion in exports away from U.S. buyers and towards South Korea and the EU by 2027. As for Mark Carney, no angry tweets or speeches. But in closed-door talks, his message was razor-sharp. Nickel and cobalt are strategic assets. If needed, we will use taxes like precision tools, not blunt weapons. Suddenly, the White House meeting room fell silent. People realize what happens when you sever a lifeline. It hits back, and hard. This wasn't a tantrum. Ottawa didn't just retaliate. They pivoted, rerouted their supply chains, shifted direction. And the numbers speak loudest. In the first half of 2025, Canada's nickel sulfate exports rose by 23%. But here's the kicker: U.S. market share shrank. South Korea and Germany snapped up the opportunity. While Washington built tax barriers like it was 1,930, other nations were brokering new trade deals. The purest nickel in North America, once destined for Michigan, now heads for Hamburg and Seoul. So what kind of future is the American electric vehicle industry facing now? One increasingly built on laterite nickel from Indonesia and the Philippines, a material often called the junk food of the mining world, cheap, dirty, and heavy with environmental guilt. Let's talk emissions. Ontario's refined nickel, powered by hydroelectricity and clean processing methods, emits just 4.2 tons of CO2 per ton of metal. In contrast, Indonesian nickel comes with a staggering carbon footprint, about 36 tons of CO2 for every ton produced. That's nearly 9 times dirtier. China's nickel isn't much better, clocking in at 18 tons per ton. Now here's the part no one in Washington seems prepared for. Starting in 2026, the European Union will implement a carbon border tax of $115 per ton of CO2. That means any EV built in the U.S. using dirty nickel could face a massive environmental penalty just to get access to European markets. What was sold as a policy to protect American jobs is rapidly turning into both an economic and environmental backfire. When you push away your cleanest, most reliable metal supplier, what are you left holding? A pile of new taxes, a border block vehicle, and a climate record that can't cross international lines without admitting guilt. And somewhere between a quiet policy meeting and a campaign fundraiser, Washington now faces 3 choices, none of them involving golden elevators. Option 1. Create a special exemption for Canadian nickel. The 30% tariff stays for everyone else, but Sudbury gets a pass. This would preserve the Ontario-Detroit battery corridor and keep EV plants from hemorrhaging money. Option 2. Go full hardball. No exceptions. Enforce tariffs across the board. Canada responds in kind, slapping on a 15% export tax, redirecting supply contract to Europe and South Korea. Detroit, left with spreadsheets full of anxiety and not enough nickel. Option 3. Compromise. Reduce the tariff to 20 to 25%, patch things up with Canada, and hope the EU delays its carbon penalties. It's not perfect, but it's less self-destructive. So what's Wall Street betting on? As of July 31st, analysts see a 60% chance of option 1 or 3, and a 40% chance of total collapse. GM isn't waiting to find out. They've already revised their 2026 EV production forecast down from 480,000 to 360,000 units, a $3.2 billion setback. And no one's laughing. Maybe this is what the 47th president considers tough negotiation. For the rest of us, it's like forcing your neighbor to take the bus, then wondering why your own driveway is empty. As policymakers shuffle memos in air-conditioned meeting rooms, average Americans are staring at dealership price tags and quietly walking away. Due to the 35% tariff and rising nickel costs, the Ford F-150 Lightning could hit $72,500 by early 2026. That's not just expensive, that's yacht territory. Meanwhile, the gasoline-powered F-150 XLT, the classic truck of the working class, still hold a 15 to 20% cost advantage over 8 years of ownership. In plain terms, the EV truck was taxed into becoming a luxury item. The gas-powered model? Suddenly, it's an economical choice again. Let's not forget, these tariffs were supposed to protect American workers. But the only thing being protected right now is oil industry profits. The same voters promised cheaper, cleaner vehicles are now priced out entirely. This isn't smart policy. It's economic self-sabotage. Shooting your own supply chain in the foot, then handing the bullet casing to your biggest competitor. Biden's administration has set a target. 50% of all new vehicle sales will be electric by 2030. But at this rate, we're looking at 20% ambition, 80% sticker shock. Who's actually able to afford an EV in 2026? It's probably not your neighbor, unless your neighbor manages a hedge fund. And here's the twist that seems lost on the White House. Ontario isn't begging for special treatment. They're issuing departure notices. If Sudbury can't ship nickel south, they'll ship it east. The EU urgently needs clean, low-carbon minerals, and Canada's hydro-refined nickel fits their green agenda perfectly. Meanwhile, South Korea has quietly boosted Ontario nickel imports by nearly 18% since March, according to Canada Trade Monitor's July 2025 report. So while Washington builds tariff walls, Ontario builds trade routes. In this new geopolitical chess match, Canada isn't playing the pawn. They're holding the center of the board. Nickel, once just a boring metal on a periodic table, is now a geopolitical power chip, and Ottawa holds it with a steady hand. What we're seeing isn't Canadian weakness. It's realization. Canada doesn't need American permission to lead in clean energy metals. They never did. Meanwhile, the person in the West Wing stares at a tariff chart like it's a campaign flyer. But here's the spoiler. The real economic contest isn't happening in Washington. It's happening in Sudbury. Ontario isn't losing. They're moving forward. So here we are, one misguided tax later, and the same nickel that quietly fueled America's EV future has become a political grenade. A $3.9 billion trade stream between Ontario and Detroit, once seamless, now finds itself choked by bad math and worse politics. Nickel isn't just an element anymore. It's a key that determines who builds, who leads, and who pays the price. If the U.S. loses access to Ontario's clean supply, who's going to risk billions building EV factories in Michigan? Tariffs don't just raise costs. They send warning flares to investors. While Canada pushes forward, while Europe opens its ports and South Korea signs long-term deals, Washington calls it a win, too distracted to notice its battery hub is running dry. And that leaves us with one real question. If America keeps closing doors on its partners, how long before those partners stop knocking? Or maybe they already have. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more updates.